listening. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, I hope that we're all listening. And thank you, Congresswoman Sinema, for this opportunity, and I yield back my time.
Thank you, Representative Cardenas. I now yield to my friend and colleague from Southern Arizona, Congressman Ron Barber.
I want to thank my colleague from Arizona, Congresswoman Sinema, for bringing us together this evening on this truly critical issue in our country. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak directly to the men and women who have served this country. To those of you who have borne a decade of war, and to those of you who have endured the psychological scars that these wars have brought, scars from traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress, I know that your wounds, and you know that your wounds, cannot always be seen, but you also know, and I know too, that they're real. I implore you to consider the grief and loss, the sadness that your families will feel if you're no longer with them. They love you. They want you to live. I implore you, suicide is not the answer. For 32 years, I worked in the field of mental health services. I know from the thousands of success stories that mental illness, post-traumatic stress, emotional issues are treatable. You can recover. If you are hurting and need help, it is there for you. It is there in your friends and your family members, and it is there in the professional services offered in your community and at the Veterans Administration. If you learn that someone is contemplating suicide, you have a responsibility to intervene. Let them know how much they mean to you. Help them get the services they need. It is everyone's responsibility to stop this terrible tragedy that is occurring every single day. As has been said already, 22 men and women who have served us in uniform are committing suicide when they return home to civilian life. You each deserve the full resources of this government and of your communities and of your friends, and it is there for you. Here in Congress, I am very pleased to say that while we talk a lot about gridlock and we talk a lot about not getting things done and the lack of bipartisanship, this is one issue on which we are truly in a bipartisan coalition. We are fighting for you to make sure that you get the support and the help and the gratitude that you deserve after serving our country so bravely. Just this week, I was deeply honored to welcome Congresswoman Tammy, she was amazing, Tammy Duckworth to my district. When I think about the greeting that she received when we went to the University of Arizona from the veterans who saw her courage, I knew that she was an inspiration not only to them but to veterans all over the country, a great model of someone who has been through so much and yet has found a reason to live and to serve her country. We went to the Veterans Center at the University of Arizona where veterans were helping other veterans not only deal with the transition back into civilian life and into school life, but also to deal with the emotional issues that they have as they make that transition. Help is there. It is there for each and every one of you who have served us so well. And I implore you, look for the help. Give the help. This is everyone's responsibility to reach out to the men and women who have served us and to extend a helping hand and to get them to the services that they need They can and will be treated, and treatment will, in fact, help them succeed, and they will, in fact, go through this terrible time that they're dealing with when they contemplate suicide. I want to thank the gentlelady from Arizona once again for bringing us together to talk about this very important topic to all Americans, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Barber. I now will yield to my colleague from Nevada, Congresswoman Dina Titus.
Well, I too would like to thank my friend from the Southwest, Congresswoman Sinema, for hosting this special hour to draw attention to Suicide Prevention Month, which we recognize here in September. Suicide within any population is a traumatic thing to deal with, but we are learning that it is increasingly important and increasingly a problem among our military and our veterans. It's critical that we work to address, to recognize, to prevent, to eliminate military suicides, and I hope that today's special order will help to shine a bright light on this very important topic. Suicide within the military is a national problem. You have heard my colleagues speak about it in their districts and their state and across the country, but it is especially acute in my home state of Nevada. A recent study done by the state of Nevada found that veterans in the Silver State commit suicide at a rate of more than 2.5 times higher than non-veterans and quadruple the national rate. The study further reported that Nevada's female veterans, those often hidden veterans, commit suicide at more than triple the overall rate for females statewide and nearly 6 times the national rate for females. The study also found that in 2010, suicide accounted for more than a quarter of the deaths among young veterans, those between 24 years and younger, throughout the state of Nevada. This is a trend we just cannot allow to continue. As other speakers have noted, every day 22 veterans take their own lives. Almost every hour, one of our nation's heroes takes his or her life. Nearly 1 in 5 suicides nationally is a veteran, even though veterans make up only about 10% of the U.S. population. As ranking member of the House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee on Disability Assistance, I'm working every day with my colleagues to ensure that veterans receive all the benefits that they've earned and the care that they need. So if you are a veteran who is struggling with thoughts of suicide, or you're the friend or family member of a veteran who needs help, please contact us. Reach out to us, because we need to know what the VA can do to better support and serve you. I would also encourage my colleagues to co-sponsor H.R. 2527, which is the National Guard Military Sexual Trauma Parity Act. This would ensure that members of the Guard receive all the care they need if they're a victim of military sexual trauma while on training missions. We know that if you are a victim and you suffer such trauma, that can often lead to suicide. On our committee, we're constantly working to ensure that the VA is providing care for veterans struggling with the thought of suicide, but it's also important that we reach out and assure veterans that they know that receiving help is not a sign of weakness. Instead, it's a sign of strength. When Army Staff Sergeant Ty Carter received the Medal of Honor, he encouraged his fellow soldiers to reach out, and for the civilian community to support them. He said to the public, "Know that they are not damaged. They are simply burdened with living with what others do not. We are resilient and will emerge even stronger over time." Sergeant Carter, we know that because of leaders like you and supported by a grateful nation, we can win the battle against military suicide. So again, let us hear from you, and let me remind veterans and those who love them that the VA operates a confidential support center that's open 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And please call if you need support. Their phone number is 1-800-273-8255, and then just press number 1. You can also send a text message to 838-255. So don't hesitate to reach out. Someone will be there to hear you. Just as you never leave a fellow soldier on the battlefield, we can't leave anyone behind when they come home. When they come home with wounds that are both visible and hidden, we should be there. So thank you to my colleagues and to the Congresswoman from Arizona for giving us an opportunity to send this message loud and clear.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman Titus. I now yield to my colleague from Pennsylvania, Congressman Matthew Cartwright.
And I thank the gentlewoman from Arizona for yielding. And I also want to join Congresswoman Dina Titus in thanking Congresswoman Sinema for arranging this special order hour and taking the leadership to put these people together to speak out on this topic. Congresswoman Sinema, I say to you that you bring honor and credit to the 9th District of Arizona in taking a leadership position in this role. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to point out that Congresswoman Sinema has brought the House together on these issues. She has brought Democrats and Republicans together in this special order hour, in case that fact has escaped your notice. We speak as one voice on behalf of American veterans, and I'm happy to lend my voice to that today. I come from Pennsylvania, which is home to nearly 1 million American veterans. These brave men and women served our country, and unfortunately, we are here to say we have not always served them. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development estimates that nationwide, 62,619 veterans are homeless on any given night. And many of these veterans do suffer from mental illness. A recently released study from the Department of Veterans Affairs found that 22 veterans commit suicide every day. Now, I heard that several months ago, Mr. Speaker, and at first I shrugged it off. I mean, we're sort of callous around here. We're used to numbers. We're used to statistics being bandied about. So when somebody said, be shocked, it's 22 American veterans committing suicide every day, I thought, well, what's that? Out of 400 or 500 suicides nationwide every day? No, it wasn't that. It was somewhere between 80 and 110 American suicides every day. So we're not talking about a small proportion. We're talking about, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about upwards of 20% of the suicides every day are American veterans committing suicide. And we heard earlier in this hour that it's something less than 10% of Americans are veterans. So it's hugely disproportionate. The number of people committing suicide in this country are hugely disproportionately veterans in this country, and that is a national embarrassment. As someone who cares deeply about veterans' issues, I'm here to tell you I have introduced 2 bills after I heard that statistic. First, the Veterans Mental Health Accessibility Act, and second, the Expediting Hiring for VA-Trained Psychiatrists Act. Now, the Veterans Mental Health Accessibility Act aims to provide for our brave servicemen and women when they return from combat with both easily visible and difficult to detect wounds. While the physical wounds of war are evident immediately, mental health issues obviously may take longer to discover. As many as 30% of the Operation Iraqi and Enduring Freedom veterans face the possible diagnosis of a mental health disorder. However, after 5 post-service years, and this is the rule in the VA, after 5 years, veterans would go to the back of the line for psychiatric health care, with the average wait time for a veteran to receive benefits at 273 days. This could mean the difference between life and death. It's like a 5-year statute of limitations. After a service member is separated from the service, if he or she does not report a combat-related mental disorder within 5 years, it's as if they do not qualify for psychiatric care. The Veterans Mental Health Accessibility Act would ensure that no veteran be denied mental health treatment, no matter when combat-related mental health disorders first appear. It eliminates that ridiculous 5-year rule. Additionally, I've introduced the Expediting Hiring for VA-Trained Psychiatrists Act. And this bill allows the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to fast-track the hiring of psychiatrists who have completed a residency at a VA facility. Mr. Speaker, I believe that we owe a great debt to those who serve our nation through military service, including those who stood ready at a moment's notice to fight for our freedom. As long as I am a member of this Congress, I will be working to increase knowledge of benefits available to the veterans community, to correct shortcomings in the VA system, and to ensure that the men and women of the armed forces who bravely serve this country receive all of the benefits to which they are so richly entitled. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and at this time I yield back to the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, Representative Cartwright. I now turn the time to my colleague from Illinois. Oh, sorry. No, not yet. Sorry. I now yield to my colleague from New York, Congressman Bill Owens. Thank you, Bill.
Without objection.
Thank you, Congresswoman Sinema. I appreciate the work you've done in bringing a bipartisan group together to address this issue. I think it's important that we understand a number of things. In my district, particularly upstate New York, there are 48 attempts at suicide every year. The hotline, which was addressed before, receives 137,000 calls on average annually, and that is statistics gathered from 2007 to 2012. That number, and I'll repeat this again for any veteran out there listening today, is 800-273-8255. How many of us have known someone who has committed suicide and have thought to ourselves, I didn't see it coming. How could I have helped? We hear that constantly when we talk to the families of those who have committed suicide. The New York Times reports that being a veteran increases your risk of suicide double. So you have 2 times a greater risk of committing suicide if you have served your country. I urge all of us to stay alert, to make sure that we are focused on watching those amongst us who may show signs of suicide, and it is incumbent upon Congress to provide the funding to defeat this terrible disease. In my district, a young man committed suicide who came from Glens Falls, who was assigned to the 10th Mountain Division in Watertown, New York. He was a skilled Black Hawk mechanic, and the theme that I mentioned before was repeated by his friends and coworkers. I didn't see it coming. How could I have helped? We say thank you to our veterans by oftentimes saying thank you for your service. But do we provide the service to them that they deserve? We do not nearly enough, and we should. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Owens. I now yield to Congresswoman Annie Kuster from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Congressman Simona, and thank you so much for bringing us together today. This is a unique experience since I've been here in the United States Congress. Today we've heard from Republicans and Democrats, men and women, people from literally every corner of our country, young and old, who have served this country and who honor those who serve us. Each of us has been touched by this issue, and I want to say from a personal perspective, having been raised by a combat veteran, my husband and I are both the children of combat veterans. My father was a World War II pilot, and he flew in 63 missions before he was shot down and served in a POW camp. My father-in-law landed on the beaches of Normandy when my father was flying overhead. And both my husband and I were raised in households that, although successful, had many dark secrets. These were households where we lived with PTSD. And I want to say to the veterans who have served our country of every era that we are here to serve you, and we will not leave you on the battlefield. I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and it's a tremendous honor. And with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, led by Congressman Benechek, who you've heard from today, on the Health Subcommittee, we will stand by the veterans who have served our country. We will work to provide the resources and to help the men and women that are working across this country in our Veterans Administration to provide you with the services and the treatment and the support that you need. It's been a tremendous honor for me as I travel around the state of New Hampshire and my district to work with veterans groups, to sit in veteran centers, and to see the one-on-one support from the VSOs, from those who have worked in this field, from people who understand the dark secrets that you carry. We are here for you. We will work together, and under the leadership of Congresswoman Sinema and all of us who serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee and throughout this U.S. Congress, please know that we are here for you and we will not forget. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Congresswoman Custer.
The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate concurs in the House amendment to the Senate Amendment 2 H.R. 527, cited as the Helium Stewardship Act of 2013.
The gentlewoman from Arizona, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield to my colleague from Illinois, Congressman William Enyart.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, always ready, always there. That's the motto of the National Guard. That motto is engraved on this commander's coin, my commander's coin, that I carry with me wherever I go. Before I came to Congress, I had the honor, the privilege, and the responsibility for 5 years to exercise command over the Illinois Army and Air National Guard. I commanded 10,000 soldiers and 3,000 airmen. It's my responsibility to train them, equip them, and order them into war. Most of them came back. 34 of them did not. 19 of them during my command. I carry those names with me in my breast pocket. Ranks, names, ages, hometowns. Units of assignment, date of death. What I don't carry are the 2 soldiers that I lost to suicide. I don't know why I don't have those names. I should have those names. They didn't come back either. Most of those soldiers that I ordered to go to war came home. Those few didn't. Many of them came home wounded. Some of those wounds not visible. The first time a soldier under my command committed suicide, my staff came to me and said, "General, "Are you going to go to the funeral?" I said, "Of course I'm going to the funeral." He said, "Well, your predecessor didn't go to funerals for soldiers who committed suicide." I said, "I do. We took them whole, sent them to war, and they came back broken. That's my responsibility. I go." Congressman Jim McDermott earlier spoke about responsibility. He talked about how we in Congress and we as a nation must take responsibility for these broken lives. I accept responsibility for what I've done. I accept responsibility for taking home men and women and sending them to war. I take responsibility for those 2 soldiers who committed suicide under my command, under my watch. It's not an easy thing to do, but that's what you have to do as a soldier, because you're always ready and you're always there. Illinois was very lucky during my command. We went several years without a single suicide, while other states were losing soldiers and airmen. And we were very proud of that. We thought we were doing a great job. And of course, it was because we were doing such a great job, and we drove it down to the lowest levels, that it was okay to be stressed and it was okay to accept help, and you should go get help. And those are all good things, and they were the right things to do. But it wasn't all that we did. Because I know those figures were a lie. I know those 0 suicides were a lie. Because we had soldiers who were drunk at 2 in the morning riding motorcycles who died. We had soldiers driving cars at 120 miles an hour 2 months after coming home from a deployment. And that was a suicide. We must respond to that. And every soldier who comes home must take responsibility for another soldier so that we can save them. Thank you.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair lays before the House an enrolled bill.
H.R. 3092, an act to amend the Missing Children's Assistance Act and for other purposes.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January the 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Majority Leader.
Well, thank you, Speaker. I also want to thank Ms. Sinema from the state of Arizona for her holding the last special order, bipartisan, to talk about this terrible plight that has happened to our veterans. 22 veterans a day, Americans, commit suicide. So thank you for bringing that to the attention of the House and to the American public, and that's an issue that we will continue to work on a bipartisan way to help our veterans. So I would like to, Mr. Speaker, at this time yield as much time as she wishes to consume, the great lady from the state of Florida.
Thank you so much to the great gentleman from the wonderful state of Texas. And I'm so glad that the gentleman brings up the word bipartisan to describe what we just witnessed, very heartfelt testimony. But we have a lot of work to do right here in the House as well, and with the Senate and with the President, because it's time for all parties to work together in a genuine, bipartisan, and adult manner to avoid a government shutdown. A shutdown is not some abstract exercise, as the gentleman knows. It has real consequences for our communities and our families. The American people sent us to Washington to work together for our great nation, and it is unacceptable for one side to refuse to negotiate. Where is the President in all of this? The bully pulpit can just as equally be used for constructive leadership as it can be used for political showmanship. Let us work together, get something done, and help America's vanishing middle class. And Mr. Speaker and Judge Poe, it is just as important to remember that in addition to the constant legislative battles happening right here in Congress, life goes on outside of the Capitol. And I want to take just a few minutes today to recognize two remarkable South Florida organizations that are holding events this weekend. Tomorrow, Go Red for Women will be celebrating its 10th anniversary in South Florida. The Go Red for Women organization is an impressive force to reckon with. Heart disease, many people don't know this, but heart disease is the #1 killer of women. It is more deadly than all forms of cancer. And fortunately, we have the strong women of Go Red taking the fight to heart disease. Mothers, daughters, sisters, and friends all are standing together and leading the change that we need and leading the charge that we need to educate, to advocate, to raise awareness about heart disease. And I want to especially congratulate Jessica Cerda Antomarchi, the Miami Heart Society Director, as well as Gabriel Finley Hayes, the 2013 Chair, and all of the women of Go Red. With their continued strength and leadership, we will finally put an end to heart disease. And finally, Judge Poe, thank you for this time. Let me congratulate the Lupus Association, the Lupus Foundation of America, Southeast Florida chapter, and they will be holding this year's Walk to End Lupus Now Miami this month. Despite approximately 1.5 million Americans suffering from lupus, including my stepdaughter, the lovely Catherine Leighton, we still do not know what it is that causes lupus. It is a cruel and mysterious disease. We do know that almost 28,000 people are suffering from lupus in my South Florida community. And while that disease cuts across racial, gender, and social lines, we do know that lupus disproportionately impacts women and ethnic minority populations. So I'm extremely grateful for the outreach and the advocacy of the Lupus Foundation of America, and especially its Southeast Florida chapter. As co-chair of the Congressional Lupus Caucus, I will keep up the fight against this terrible disease, and I extend my deepest gratitude to Amy Kelly Yalden and everyone in the Southeast Florida chapter for their continued incredible work, and I thank Judge Poe for the time, and let's continue to work together in a bipartisan way to avoid a government shutdown. And I thank the gentleman for the time. Very courteous, very Texan.
I thank the lady. I'll reclaim my time. Thank you once again, Mr. Speaker. I want to spend some time talking about what I think and believe has become a scourge not only in America but in other parts of the world. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to be in the Ukraine. I was there on some energy issues and came in contact with that scourge that I will talk about today. The Ukraine, because of its location, because of its former Soviet connections, and because of its high poverty, has a problem that a lot of countries do, and that's on human trafficking. And I'm not talking about people going from one country to another legally or even illegally. I'm talking about people being trafficked to other locations for sex slavery. And the Ukraine is just one of many countries where this seems to be occurring. And the scenario, one scenario is young women looking for jobs. People from foreign countries come to the Ukraine, promise them a job in another country, that they will be paid a lot of money if they will go to this country and work doing whatever. They buy into that. They go to that other country, and they are forced into sex slavery. And there they are in a situation that is, it's awful. Many of them never get out of it. Some of them, the only way they get out of it is to get someone else convinced to replace them in this scourge. And the Ukraine is not the only country. It's not even one of the primary countries, but it's just one. And so I learned about that, and I learned about the situation and what they were doing in the country of Ukraine and trying to educate young girls about this issue and how this was a trap that they could get themselves involved in. Recently, I had the chance to be in Central America for several reasons. One, about terrorism, narcotic trafficking, drugs, etc. But also came upon a situation in Central America and the nation of Costa Rica that's a little different, but not really that different than what's taken place in Europe and North Africa. And that is the plight, once again, of sex slavery, sex trafficking. In all of Costa Rica, there is one shelter for minor sex trafficking victims. It is called Salvando Corazones. If my Spanish is correct or my English is correct, that means saving hearts. It's run by an American lady who went down to Costa Rica for other purposes and found this problem and just decided to stay. Maria is doing, I think, a tremendous job saving hearts. I call her the Mother Teresa of Central America. Her story is unbelievable, what she is doing to rescue girls, young girls, out of this sex slavery, sex trafficking that is taking place domestically in Costa Rica. So myself and Congresswoman Janice Hahn, Democrat from California, we spent a Sunday afternoon, it was supposed to be about an hour, talking to these folks at this shelter. We spent the whole afternoon talking to these girls about their plight, what had happened to them, and what Salvando Corazones with Maria are doing to treat them and help them get back into a life, because many of them had no life. Let me explain it further. Prostitution in Costa Rica is legal for adults. Minor prostitution is illegal, but prostitution generally is a legal situation. And they attract a lot of foreigners to that country for a lot of reasons, but this is one reason for sex tourism. People from other countries and people in Costa Rica take advantage of the legal prostitution system. That's a debate for Americans to have all the time, apparently. But what occurs is, once that phenomena starts, it's an easy move for a pimp to sell a child into prostitution, even though they're working with legal prostitutes, legal prostitution, which is also sometimes sex slavery. It's easy to move into that using children. It's my understanding, and I asked as many people as I could, the people in the government, the people at the shelter, tell me who these foreigners are that come to this nation for sex tourism. And they all really just told me the same thing. It's Americans. Primarily Americans, Europeans, and other countries as well, for the legal prostitution. But then you have these young girls that get caught in this system that are sold into trafficking by everybody that comes in contact with them. Sometimes it's their own family members. And so this shelter, run by Maria, tries to rescue these little girls, young girls, and salvage their lives and, as the saying goes, save their hearts. Have a lot of examples. Time doesn't permit for me to only go an hour. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we can't have filibusters in the House of Representatives. But during this hour, I just want to mention some of the situations and try to focus on how sex trafficking, human trafficking of children affects Americans and what maybe some things that we need to be aware of. And I've changed all the names of these girls because I respect their privacy. But Abigail was born in Miami. Her father was a Costa Rican. Her mother was from New York. At the age of five, Mr. Speaker, her father began sexually assaulting her. At 8, she had her first injection of heroin to keep her quiet during sex. She was removed from public school and kept out of school because teachers were getting suspicious. Then at the age of 11, she was sent by her father to Costa Rica so he could have her shared with other people, generally the family members. She got pregnant twice, and she decided that if all she was good for was sex, and the people who really loved her, treated her this way, that she might as well turn into prostitution. And so she did. She started when she was 11. She was eventually found at a bus stop, apparently strung out on drugs, barely hanging on to life. She was rescued by this organization and treated with the dignity that she deserved, and the process now is a success story. After she was homeschooled by Maria, she began the healing process, and now she's older, she's sober, and she's married, and a child is on the way. That's a success story of someone that was put in international sex trafficking. Diana, at the age of 5, another 5-year-old, was sold by her mother for a cell phone for sex in Costa Rica. She was sold every week for over a year until somebody saw the problem and complained to the government. She was actually raised thinking this was a normal lifestyle for a 5-year-old. The staff at Salvano Corazones have rescued her, and they're working with her today. I had the chance to meet her. Remarkable person. Felicia, she was raped by her stepfather, gave birth at 13 to her brother's child, and is now pregnant again at 16. She was sold by her stepfather to someone who wanted to put her to work on the streets, and her stepfather thought this is easy money for me to sell my stepdaughter on the streets of Costa Rica. She recently was rescued, and she is at this safe house. Of course, we need to understand that these girls, they're tough. They're tough victims to work with. Talk to anybody. The numerous groups in the United States, especially working with these young women. They're hard victims. They're mad at the world. They have a lot of hate, anger. Of course they do. Who wouldn't, being treated this way from a mere infant? And so I just want to make it clear to Americans that these victims are hard to work with, but they are, understandably, we can see why they are in the situation that they are in. Why have they become victims? The reason, Mr. Speaker, boils down to one word: demand. There is the demand to abuse these young girls for money. And the demand, money, by the pimp selling the girl so he can get money, and the demand being the customer. There's 3 people in this scenario. There is the trafficker that's, goes around trafficking these young women, either domestically or internationally. There, on the other end, is the victim, and she is a victim. She is not a criminal. She is not a prostitute. She's forced into this conduct. But in the center is the person who demands that service and is willing to pay for it. And I'm going to spend the rest of my time mentioning the demand and what needs to be done about that. Beatrice, she was 14, was brought to Costa Rica from Nicaragua, an internationally trafficked child, to work in a home, similar to the young lady that I mentioned in the Ukraine. Promised a job in another country. She's going to help her family. Good person. But she's trapped once she gets into that foreign country that is not what she's going to get as a job. But that's what she was promised, that you get a job in Costa Rica, you're from Nicaragua, you're poor, you don't have any money. I've got a job waiting for you in Costa Rica. So she goes, had the thought of helping her family out, and instead she was trapped into sex trafficking and forced into prostitution. She was sold in hotels, brothels, and luxury condos, and she had to have sex with men up to 17 times a day for money. She was gang raped by foreigners, and she was tortured into compliance by her pimp, and she was drugged so that she would comply. That is slavery, Mr. Speaker. Forced slavery in the name of money. There was a young mother from Mexico named Alma came to the United States to work in 2009. She, like many others who come here looking for a better opportunity, wanted to help her family. She paid a coyote to help her cross the border into my home state of Texas. Her ultimate destination was South Carolina, but the coyote wanted to stop in Houston for some other business. Alma arrived at what she thought was a safe house in my congressional district, in an area of what is called Spring Branch. She later discovered that this wasn't a safe house at all. She said it was a living hell, the home of a leader of a human trafficking ring in Houston, Texas. Alma and some others that had been trafficked were all told that they had to give the trafficker information because the information they gave was about their families, so the trafficker could hold them for ransom because they were kidnapped. The trafficker made the ransom calls for to the families demanding money. The problem was with Alma, her parents, her family had no money. She was held in that safe house as a hostage in that prison, living hell, and she was sexually assaulted numerous times. The family, like I said, could not afford to pay any money, and so the trafficker used her as a sex slave, that she was sold to customers who had the demand for that activity. Eventually, though, she was arrested, and she was glad she was arrested. Law enforcement did a good job, went after the trafficker, got him, got Alma, rescued her. She believed that she would have been killed or certainly further abused had not she been rescued by the police. Other than the name, this is a real person, real victim, trafficked internationally into the United States. Unfortunately, many victims are not rescued. Some certainly are not rescued very quickly at all, and they face the daily abuse of being a slave. Who are the individuals that traffic these victims? Well, they cover a lot of individuals. You have the drug cartels, for example, and the criminal gangs. They traffic young women, and they do it for money as well. And the thing about using a sex slave, there's more money involved in sex slavery than there is bringing drugs into the United States. I mean, you bring drugs in the United States, it's a one-time deal. You get the money as the bad guy, and you're gone, you're captured, you go to prison. I used to be a judge. I sent a lot of them to prison. But with sex slavery, the trafficker has the ability to use the slave more than once, and there's a lot of money. And the risk of what punishment may happen to the trafficker is really less than in selling drugs. So you have the drug cartels, you have criminal gangs like the one I mentioned with Alma, you have individuals doing this, you have family members doing this, either trafficking their kids, these kids, in their own country, or move them to foreign countries. And it's happening worldwide, Mr. Speaker. It's not just happening in a handful of countries. I don't know the estimate of the number of people trafficked throughout the world, but the numbers are staggering from what I do here. I'd like to mention one other person from Texas. Cheryl grew up in an abusive home. She was sexually and physically abused by her father. Her mother left when Cheryl was young to escape the abuse by this abusive male. So at the age of 12, Cheryl ran away, because some of these victims turn out to be started as runaways from home. She began hitchhiking with truck drivers and anyone else that would take her. This led her to end up being with a motorcycle group, a biker club, and she was taken advantage of by those individuals. One of those individuals became a trafficker. And so what happened to her after she left home at 12, she was forced to dance at a strip club by day, and then at night she was sold on the streets. She was in this world of human trafficking. She was not a criminal. She was a victim. We need to make sure that's understood. She had no idea how to get any help because of the abuse that the trafficker would instill on her if she tried to leave. It actually happened that she was performing at a strip club, and one of the patrons figured out she's not an adult. She was 15 by then, after all these 3 years of abuse. And one of the patrons helped her escape. It was a long road for recovery and restoration, but Cheryl's a survivor, and she has personally founded the mission of Serenity Ranch to help other victims of human trafficking. So those are some examples, Mr. Speaker, of some real individuals. When Ms. Hahn and myself were visiting those young girls in Costa Rica, their shelter, like I said, is the only one in the country. It's up in the mountains. It's hard to get to. We complained a little bit, I did, about the rough road, the dirt road, going up into the mountains to visit this shelter. After visiting with those girls, we didn't complain anymore about the rain, the roads. When we left, we just thought about those girls. And I call them girls because they were girls. They're minors. I believe the youngest one that I talked to that day was 10, and the oldest was 13. When we left, all we could talk about, we really didn't talk much at all, was about the plight of how here we are in the year 2013, how humanity maybe has progressed in some areas, but in the area of slavery, sex slavery, it's maybe getting worse. It has become a scourge. So, does it just happen in other places? No, sir. It does not. I've already mentioned Houston. Houston, because of its location, is one of the hubs in the United States for sex trafficking. It's close to the Mexican border, Gulf of Mexico. It's an international city. Young girls are brought there, and adult women, and trafficked to other parts of the United States. So what happens? Well, the police will raid a prostitution ring, let's say, and they will arrest the trafficker, the pimp. They'll arrest the victim, even though in many cases she was forced into prostitution. And they put the victim in the criminal justice system, usually the juvenile justice system, but it's still the criminal justice system. They go to jail. And here's one of the reasons why. And I'm not faulting the police, because, I mean, I know a lot of police officers and a lot of them that work in this area. Tough assignment. But, Mr. Speaker, there's no place to put them. There's no place where that police officer can take that 12-year-old trafficking victim that has been forced into prostitution, either domestically or internationally. There's no place to put them at all. I understand from SPCA that there are about 5,000 shelters in the United States, animal shelters, 5,000, and that's great. I have Dalmatians. I've gotten Dalmatians from Operation Rescue, from a shelter, from the SPCA. So, I mean, I think that's a good thing that we've got those shelters for animals. But in the United States, for minor sex trafficking victims, there are 226 beds. That's it. That's all there is. So the police officer doesn't have a place to take this victim, minor sex trafficking victim, except put them in jail for their safety and for other purposes. And you can see a lot of problems with putting them in jail. First, they have a criminal record, even though they are not, in many cases, a criminal at all. They're forced into this. So that doesn't make them a criminal. That makes them a victim. They have a criminal record. They're put in the criminal justice system. Once they're in the criminal justice system, they stay in the criminal justice system because there's no place to put them. I'd like unanimous consent to put into the record the statistics of where the 226, where I obtained the statistic of 226 beds for minor sex trafficking victims, where it comes from, different organizations, Shared Hope, etc. I'd like unanimous consent to put this in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So that is a problem we need to work on, finding places to put them when they are rescued, and having a mindset changed in this country that we, as Americans, see this situation in three parts. We see the trafficker, we see the demand, the customer. I'll get back to that person again in a minute. But we see this third person as a prostitute, no, but a victim, yes, and treat them as a victim. And then we can go a long way helping stop this problem of scourge of human trafficking. So I've introduced legislation, bipartisan legislation, with Carolyn Maloney, Democrat. Carolyn Maloney's been working on this trafficking issue before I was ever in Congress. But we've introduced the End Sex Trafficking Act, along with Carolyn Maloney, as I said, Congresswoman Kay Granger from Texas, Rick Nolan, and Kristi Noem in the House. On the Senate side, it's bipartisan as well. Senator John Cornyn and Senator Amy Klobuchar have the same bill in the Senate. And what does it do? Well, let me mention this. The United States spent about $25 million in 2010 on domestic anti-trafficking. The United States spent $85 million on international efforts to stop human trafficking. Yes, there is more for international trafficking issues, helping those, than there are in the United States. 25 million. That is a number. But if you, in the big scheme of things, what is $25 million? Well, I understand a predator costs $25 million. The United States spent $25 million in teaching pottery classes in Morocco. About $25 million was given to Pakistan for their schools. I'm just saying how much $25 million is. It's not a lot of money. But that's how much money is spent in the United States in 2010 on this issue. And so what we want to do is to expand that amount of money. And I'll show you how we're going to do it without raising taxpayer money. But specifically talking about the End Sex Trafficking Act that we've introduced, here's what the federal law does. If the trafficker, bona fide human trafficker, gets caught, Federal law is tough. That trafficker, these federal judges, God bless them, they are really nailing these traffickers, as they should. They're the scum of the earth, these people that sell little girls and boys, too, for sex slavery. On the other end, of course, we're not doing a whole lot to find homes, shelters for the young girls. But the person that escapes really prosecution is the person in the middle. So what we have done in this bill, the End Sex Trafficking Act, we're going after the customer, the demand. Because as I mentioned earlier, that is the root of all this evil, is that there is the demand for it. And all we do is we apply the same federal laws to the trafficker, to the customer. Sure, there's got to be a federal connexus. Interstate commerce has got to be involved. We're talking about only federal cases. We're not talking about state cases. So that the demand is decreased by punishment. Because they, as we all know, we've seen the reports of when a prostitution ring is busted somewhere, not involved in trafficking necessarily. You find out the name of the pimp and how careful we go out of our way to protect the identity of the person that's the customer. Well, those days are going to end if we get this legislation, because those customers are going to be able to be punished under the law for buying sex, giving that money to a trafficker to have sex with minor children in the United States. So that's what we do in this bill. And the days of boys being boys, they're gone. Hopefully, we can make sure that they're gone by making sure that they're held accountable for the actions that they chose to voluntarily do. Now, as I mentioned, I used to be a criminal court judge in Texas. If I had my way and I was writing the law the way I thought it would be best to stop the demand, these people that are convicted, they not only go to jail. You talk about having photographs on the Internet. We'd have the photograph of the customer, the person that abused the child that had been sold into sex slavery. That'd slow that down. It'd slow the demand down if we started publicizing who those people were if they were convicted. If there was no demand, there would be less supply. And the demand is the answer, I think, Mr. Speaker, into going in after stopping this scourge on the United States and other countries. There are over 100 organizations that support this bipartisan legislation. I'd like unanimous consent to put the names of these 100 organizations into the congressional record.
Without objection.
That's the first step. Hold